Hello, I'm here with Bob today. Thank you for coming, Bob.
You're welcome.
You said that you were the president or the runner of other conferences.
Well, I'm past president of the Mass Council for the Social Studies, and I was responsible for running this conference last year.
What are some of the things you've learned from being at other conferences about running your own conference?
One of the things that really trying to pay attention to is how to attract young teachers to come to conferences, because when you look around, a lot of the people here are people that I started teaching with and have been teaching with. In fact, my case, I'm a retired teacher and I'm here, but we want to find the young people who really need what we have to offer. But either they don't know we're here or they can't get out of school in order to come to the conference. So we're trying to figure out strategies to get young teachers to attend, or whatever it takes to get them to come.
So, have you ever done one of the sessions where you've run a session and spoke to people?
Yeah, oh yeah.
What did you speak about?
Actually, I've run several sessions. I used to run a leadership session where we had department heads from pretty much across New England that would come and we'd present a particular program, and then we spend the afternoon talking about issues that they were dealing with at their schools that other people might have solutions to. So that was good. I ran a session on new to the profession where it was geared towards college students who were majoring in history, hoping to find history jobs. And myself and some superintendents and principals and other department heads will tell them what we look for when we see a candidate. When we have an opening and we're interviewing candidates, what in particular we're looking for.
Okay. So, can I ask you some things about when you were a teacher?
Sure.
Okay. So, what was some of the things that you've learned from your students when you were teaching?
I've learned that most kids think they get ADD because most kids don't have an attention span much more than 10 or 15 minutes, and it's hard to convince them that that's normal. As when you're a kid, it's very normal to have an attention span of 10 to 15 minutes. And what happens as you get older is you learn strategies to check in, check out, check in, check out, without losing too much of what you're supposed to be getting. If you're sitting in an hour and a half class in college, you're going to check in and out a bunch of times over that period of time. And I've learned from kids that being funny matters. I bet you'll tell me that the best teachers you got are your funniest teachers. And you may even be able to make a case that you've learned more from them because they have a way of getting that information to you that's interesting as opposed to just giving you dry data that you write down in a notebook. I've learned that every kid's different, that sometimes you think you've had a kid like that before, but they're different. I've learned to treat siblings differently because the last thing a kid wants to hear is, I had your brother and I expect you to be a certain way.
Yeah.
So actually, I've learned an awful lot from kids.
So, if you were talking to a new teacher about keeping students engaged, what would be the best advice that you give them, or any other advice that you would say to them?
Well, short of sticking your finger into an outlet to get a jolt of electricity, high energy. I think the key to engaging kids is high energy. You've got to match their energy level. And if their energy level is low because you got them first thing in the morning and they're still half asleep, you got to get them going. If you're not excited about what you're doing, how can you expect your kids to be excited?
Mm-hmm.
So my thing was always and sometimes you got to fake it, because quite frankly, if you're teaching 180 days, you're not excited 180 days. But part of the job is to sell it. You got to sell excitement to kids. I can remember sometimes standing outside my room going, okay, put the smile on my face and walk in and pretend that this was the most interesting, most exciting thing I was going to do over the course of that day. Kids generally buy into it. They're looking for somebody to feed that energy.
So, what was one of the most successful things that you've done in your classroom that kept the students engaged, even without the high energy? Like, what was another thing that kept them engaged, but what was, the most successful?
Well, I learned coming to one of these conferences, I learned from somebody on how to do the Constitutional Convention, and I ran it over 5 days. And there was a different theme every day of what actually happened at the Constitutional Convention. Students were actual people that were at the Constitutional Convention. They were given profiles, so they knew who the person was, whether they were a slave owner, whether they were a shipper, whatever they did for a living, they had to learn. They had to learn what was part of their background that got them elected to the Continental Congress. And it was fascinating because kids really would get into the role. And some kids who tended to be on the periphery a lot of the times would jump in with both feet because they had a chance to perform. And became really glaring if somebody didn't prepare for their role, because they might have a part to play in something. For example, whether you're debating whether slaves are going to count as 3/5 of a person or a whole person or no people. And for most people that understand the 3/5 compromise, it sounds bizarre that we would call a person 3/5 of a person for purposes of determining population. But when you see the whole thing materialize, you know how that happened. Because you would require kids to stick to their guns. So if you were a southern plantation owner that had 300 slaves, you couldn't say, I will just abolish slavery, because that wouldn't serve your best interest. So you would have to dig your heels in and fight and fight and fight and fight and say, we had cases where we had kids that would get up and walk out of the convention. You're going to abolish slavery? We're not going to be part of the Union. We can't afford it. We're South Carolina. 2 out of every 3 citizens of South Carolina is a slave. Don't tell us we can't have slaves. We're out of business, so no. We'll get up and walk out. So that was fascinating. It was fun. It was interesting. It took 5 days, and there was a lot of blood in the street when we were done.
You said something about performing. Have you ever done any other projects where you were performing, or have you ever tried to incorporate performing into the classroom that you used to teach in? Well,
what I can tell you is, and any good teacher will tell you, it's all performance. Everything we do in a classroom is performance. Have I sung to my kids? No, because that would break their eardrums. I'm not a very good singer. But the goal is to get a sense of what your class is like, figure out a way to get to them because you got some information you want them to get, and then do it. And you might have back-to-back classes on the same subject that would be very different depending upon the class. My job as the teacher/performer is to figure out a way to get to the core of that class and get them to buy into what I'm trying to do. And you're in the 8th grade now. You've been in a lot of classes, you know.
Yeah.
Classes have their own personality.
Yeah.
And it's based on the kids that are in there and how they interact with each other. And it's my job to assess that and then figure out a strategy to teach what I'm trying to teach, taking advantage as opposed to butting heads with you. If you like to talk a lot, I'm going to let you talk a lot. But I'm going to give you stuff to talk about, and I'm going to keep making sure that you get to that part of it. You're not just blabbing about what you did last night, that you're going to be blabbing about something that matters to the other kids in class.
Okay, well, thank you for sitting down and interviewing with me.
You're welcome.